If you have ever felt lost, if you have ever tried something with everything you had, only to watch it fail publicly, if you have ever been told, directly or indirectly, that you are not special, not talented enough, not built for this world, then this story is not about Joe Rogan. It's about you. Because before the microphones, before the millions of listeners, before the influence, before the platform, Joe Rogan was a man with no clear place in the world. Not stupid, not lazy, not unmotivated, just misplaced. And that is one of the most painful states a human being can live in. When you have energy but no direction, when you have curiosity but no container, when you have hunger but no table that wants you. Joe didn't grow up dreaming of being famous. He grew up trying to feel safe. Born in New Jersey, raised in a home where anger wasn't occasional but atmospheric, he learned early that unpredictability changes you. It sharpens some instincts and dulls others. His father was violent, not in stories, in reality. So Joe did what many young boys do when the world feels unstable. He searched for control. And control for him came through movement, through discipline, through fighting. Martial arts gave him something school never did: clear rules, immediate feedback, a sense that effort mattered. If you trained, you improved. If you didn't, you paid for it. No politics, no pretending. By his late teens, Joe was good, very good. Taekwondo wasn't a hobby for him. It was identity. He competed at a high level. He won tournaments. He tasted that intoxicating feeling of being respected for something real. For the first time, people didn't look past him. They looked at him. But here's the part nobody romanticizes. Being good at something doesn't mean it will love you back. Joe trained obsessively. His body hardened. His confidence grew. But something else crept in quietly: fear. The fear of injury. The fear of permanent damage. The fear that one wrong kick could end everything he had built. And one day he looked ahead and saw the future. Pain, broken joints, limited mobility, not glory. So he walked away, not because he failed, but because he saw the cost. And that decision haunted him, because when you leave the thing that defined you before something else replaces it, you don't become free, you become empty. Joe drifted. He tried college, dropped out. He tried different jobs. None fit. He had a voice, but nowhere to use it. Opinions, but no audience. He wasn't exceptional in a way the world could monetize yet. And that's the dangerous zone, because this is where people start lying to themselves, or numbing themselves, or shrinking. Joe didn't shrink, but he didn't know where to go either. So he did what confused people often do. He tried comedy, not because he was good at it, but because it scared him. He walked onto stages where nobody knew his name and said words that died in the air. Silence is heavier than booze, and he carried a lot of silence. Night after night, small rooms, bad sets, awkward laughter. People didn't clap because they were inspired. They clapped because it was over. And still, he kept going. Not because he believed in success, but because he believed in process. Comedy taught him something fighting never did. You cannot force connection. You can only earn it. Comedy didn't reward Joe Rogan for effort. It punished him for ego. On stage, strength meant nothing. Confidence meant nothing. Physical dominance meant absolutely nothing. All that mattered was whether the room trusted you enough to follow your thoughts. And most nights, they didn't. Joe bombed so often that failure stopped feeling dramatic. It became routine. He would drive home after late shows, replaying every sentence in his head, wondering why something that felt intelligent inside his skull sounded empty once it left his mouth. That's where many people quit. Not when things explode, but when nothing happens. No applause, no progress, no validation. But Joe kept showing up, not because he was chasing laughter, but because he was learning something deeper. He was learning how people think when they relax, what makes them lean forward, what makes them disconnect, what words feel honest and which ones feel performed. Comedy stripped him. It removed the athlete identity. It removed the tough guy posture. It removed the illusion that talent guarantees belonging. He had to rebuild from zero. Around the same time, opportunity knocked, but not gently. Television auditions, hosting gigs, small roles. Joe didn't look like the clean-cut broadcaster networks wanted. He spoke too freely. He questioned too much. He didn't package himself neatly. Still, he got in. Fear factor gave him money, visibility, stability, and also discomfort, because suddenly he was known for something that wasn't him. Hosting wasn't his voice. It was a role, a mask, a paycheck. He did it well, but it didn't feed him. Then came broadcasting, radio rooms, producers, executives, and eventually rejection. Not quiet rejection, public rejection. Joe was fired from a radio job for saying things that made management uncomfortable, opinions, questions, curiosity that didn't fit the format. Once again, he was told directly that he didn't belong. This is the part most biographies rush through, but this is the moment that matters. Because Joe was no longer young, no longer broke enough to pretend he had nothing to lose, no longer naive enough to believe the system would adapt to him. He had bills, a reputation, a growing sense of self, and still, the door closed. That's when something subtle shifted. Joe stopped asking, "How do I fit into this industry?" and started asking, "What kind of environment lets me be myself without asking permission?" That question changed everything. He didn't want to perform ideas anymore. He wanted to explore them. He didn't want to argue for approval. He wanted to talk for understanding. So he did something that looked small at the time. He started recording conversations. No scripts, no producers guiding the narrative, no time limits choking curiosity, just microphones and honesty. At first, nobody cared. The audio quality was bad, the structure was messy, the guests were inconsistent, but something was different. Joe wasn't trying to be impressive, he was trying to be present. He asked questions the way real people ask them, clumsily, openly, without pretending to know the answer already. And people noticed. Not millions at first, not sponsors, not headlines, just listeners. People who felt like someone was finally saying out loud the questions they were afraid to ask at work, at school, at dinner tables. Joe didn't create a show. He created a space where curiosity wasn't punished, where disagreement didn't mean disrespect, where conversations could wander without apology. And that space grew, slowly, quietly, without permission. What Joe Rogan built didn't look like a revolution while it was happening. It looked like a hobby, a few microphones, a cluttered room, long conversations that ignored every rule of modern media. No tight segments, no sound bites designed to go viral, no polished persona, just time. And time is the one thing traditional media never allows. Executives fear it, advertisers compress it, formats cut it into safe pieces. But Joe leaned into length because length exposes truth. You can't fake yourself for 3 hours. Masks slip, certainty cracks, real thinking appears. At first, people mocked it. Who listens to 3-hour conversations? Who has the attention span? Who cares what a comedian thinks about science, philosophy, or politics? But those critics misunderstood something fundamental. Joe wasn't positioning himself as an expert. He was positioning himself as a learner. And learners are dangerous in systems built on fixed narratives. The podcast grew not because Joe had answers, but because he was willing to sit with uncertainty longer than most people were comfortable doing. He let guests speak. He let ideas breathe. He let contradictions exist without rushing to resolution. That patience built trust. Listeners didn't feel talked down to. They felt invited in. And over time, the audience changed. At first, it was comedians and fight fans, then scientists, then artists, then people who felt intellectually homeless, too curious for slogans, too skeptical for dogma. Joe didn't chase them. They found him. This is where his past started to make sense. The fighter who learned discipline, the comedian who learned timing, the broadcaster who learned censorship. All of it converged. He wasn't great at fitting into boxes. He was great at building rooms. And those rooms became enormous. The platform grew so large that it scared institutions because Joe didn't owe them anything. No boss, no board, no editorial leash. That independence came at a cost. He was criticized constantly, misquoted frequently, attacked from all directions. People accused him of being irresponsible, then of being dangerous, then of being too influential, which is what happens when someone speaks without a script in a world addicted to control. Joe didn't respond by apologizing his curiosity away. He also didn't double down out of spite. He did something harder. He stayed the same. He kept asking questions. He kept changing his mind publicly. He kept inviting people he disagreed with. That made everyone uncomfortable. Because consistency of character is more threatening than consistency of opinion. Joe never claimed moral authority. He claimed conversation. And in doing so, he found the thing he'd been searching for his entire life. Not success, placement, the right environment for his temperament. Some people are born to lead companies. Some are born to teach. Some are born to build systems. Joe Rogan was born to explore ideas out loud, and once he stopped trying to be anything else, everything aligned. Money followed, influence followed, attention followed, but none of those were the source. The source was finally standing in the right place. When success finally arrived, it didn't arrive quietly. The numbers became impossible to ignore. Millions of listeners, episodes circulating faster than news cycles, conversations shaping public debate without ever claiming to. And then came the moment that made people stop pretending this was still just a podcast. The deal. A platform paid Joe Rogan an amount so large it broke people's ability to think clearly. Not because of envy alone, but because it shattered a belief that had been quietly enforced for decades. That you needed permission. Joe didn't go through traditional gates. He didn't climb a corporate ladder. He didn't conform to editorial standards designed to flatten individuality. He built something so authentic that the system had to come to him. And that terrified the system. Critics didn't just attack his words. They attacked his right to speak. They framed curiosity as danger, conversation as irresponsibility, nuance as betrayal. Joe became a symbol without asking to be one, and symbols attract fire. Every sentence was dissected, every guess was scrutinized, every clip was pulled out of context and weaponized. This is where many people would fold, apologize until they disappear, self-censor until the edge dulls, retreat into safety. Joe didn't do that, but he also didn't pretend he was above consequence. He listened, he adjusted, he learned, not because he was forced to, but because growth requires humility. That balance is rare, stubborn enough to remain honest, flexible enough to evolve. Joe understood something from fighting that most intellectual spaces forget. You don't win by refusing to see openings. You win by adapting without losing your stance. He acknowledged mistakes without surrendering curiosity. He accepted criticism without allowing it to define him. And through that, he modeled something people desperately needed to see. That you can change your mind without betraying yourself. That confidence doesn't mean certainty. It means resilience. Joe never claimed to be right. He claimed the right to think. And that distinction is everything. Behind the scenes, he stayed grounded in the habits that kept him sane. Training, routine, discipline, conversations with people outside his bubble. He knew the danger of echo chambers. He'd lived inside one before, his own head during darker times. So he kept opening doors to voices he disagreed with, to perspectives that challenged him, to conversations that made him uncomfortable. Because comfort had never led him anywhere worth going. The boy who once searched for control through fighting had found something stronger: autonomy, not dominance over others, ownership of his space. And that's the quiet lesson underneath Joe Rogan's story. You don't find your place by being better than everyone else. You find it by being honest about who you are and ruthless about building an environment that lets that version of you exist without apology. As the noise grew louder around him, Joe Rogan's life became quieter. That's the part people rarely understand. From the outside, it looked like chaos, controversy, headlines, arguments that never seemed to end. But inside his actual life, things simplified. He trained, he talked, he listened. He stopped chasing validation because he had already paid for it with years of confusion. Joe had learned something that only misfits ever truly grasp. The world doesn't need you to be more impressive. It needs you to be more accurate. Accurate to your temperament, accurate to your curiosity, accurate to your limits. He wasn't the smartest man in every room. He wasn't the most disciplined thinker. He wasn't morally perfect. But he was consistent with himself, and consistency builds trust, first internally, then externally. Joe never became a media king by trying to rule anything. He became one by refusing to pretend, refusing to shrink his questions, refusing to sanitize his curiosity, refusing to belong to spaces that required silence in exchange for safety. The failed athlete didn't fail because he lacked ability. The fired broadcaster didn't fail because he lacked professionalism. They failed because they were in the wrong rooms. Once Joe stopped asking, "How do I succeed here?" and started asking, "Where do I function best?" everything changed. That question is the real takeaway. Not how to get famous, not how to build a platform, not how to dominate an industry, but how to place yourself where your natural wiring becomes an advantage instead of a liability. Most people aren't broken, they're just misplaced. Joe Rogan's life is proof that finding your place is often harder than improving yourself. But once you do, effort feels lighter, growth feels natural, and impact becomes inevitable. He didn't conquer the media. He built a table where conversations could survive longer than headlines. And in a world obsessed with noise, that turned out to be power.